Deciding how, why, and when to use AI across your organisation is something that HR professionals can play a really important role in, because AI affects jobs, skills, teams, managers, and the way that work gets done. So this means that getting AI adoption right for the organisation that you work in, it isn't just about choosing the right technology or consulting with the tech team. It's about making sure the right people foundations are in place too. And today's guest, Charlotte Goulding, believes this is a really big opportunity for the HR profession. And her message is a really simple one, but a powerful one, which is don't wait to be invited into the conversation about AI. Instead, Charlotte shows us how HR can help lead and shape that conversation. She shares her brilliant 5 People Foundations framework, which is designed to help organizations to grow, to change, to adapt, and to succeed without losing what makes them special. We talk about a huge range of things, including why traditional job descriptions might no longer work as well as they once did. We talk about why managers will become even more important as AI changes work. And we also discuss how performance, recognition, and HR operations might need to evolve. Another thing that we explore is how HR can help organizations make thoughtful decisions about AI while keeping people, trust, and culture at the heart of them. So important. Before we dive in, though, if we haven't met before, I'll quickly say hello. I'm Fay Wallis, a career and executive coach for HR and people professionals, and this is HR Coffee Time, the podcast designed to help you have a successful and fulfilling HR career. Welcome to the show, Charlotte. It's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me, Faye. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I'm really pleased you've invited me to be on your show. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm really, really excited to share all of your fabulous knowledge with the listeners and anyone watching today. So I'm really grateful. And let's see if I can get this the right way round without tripping over my words. So I know that when we were chatting before, you said to me that you think it's really important we don't just focus on, let me get this right, AI for HR. We also need to be focusing on HR for AI. So I'm going to start off by asking you that. What do you mean by that?
Yes, and completely the right way round.
It's like a tongue twister you've given me for the episode, Charlotte.
I think I have been completely struck by the scale of opportunity that stands in front of our profession at the moment, and see that as twofold, like you just described. So first of all, we've got a lot of conversation at the minute about how AI can help HR and support us to be more efficient. We know that we have huge amounts of transactional, operational, reactive work, and there's definitely scope there for us to become more efficient. But I think crucially, the other side of that is how can we as a profession support our organizations as they work through their AI adoption? And at the core of AI adoption at the moment really is an enormous transformation, unlike any of us have seen before. And HR, we are the profession that understands both the human side and the organizational side and the design side of that. And so I see this huge once in a career opportunity that we have to redesign work, make sure that humans at the heart of it can focus on what is irreplaceably human about us and what our roles in organizations. And I think my kind of ask and the message to all HR professionals is just don't wait to be invited into that room. It's understandably in some ways focusing a lot on the tooling at the moment. And so it's easy for us to think, well, this is, it's technology adoption. So our CTO can lead on this. But that's a real miss. And just don't wait to get those invites. Try and get yourself into the rooms where those decisions are being made. And don't question your relevance to those conversations. It can be easy to do that. But we understand transformations. We've done it, through our careers. And here is the biggest opportunity for us to contribute.
It's really exciting, isn't it? I hope that everyone listening or watching is thinking, oh, yes, what a brilliant opportunity. Because I feel like in the pandemic, everyone who worked in HR, or hopefully a lot of people who worked in HR, were really recognised for the value that they were able to bring to their organisations. But recently, really depressingly, HR's been getting a real bashing, especially in the press. There's been a lot of negativity about the profession. I've personally found it half upsetting, half infuriating, I think, because I just feel, oh my goodness, so frustrating that people don't realise how hardworking and brilliant HR professionals are. But with the advent of AI, I feel like it's a real opportunity for us to be, again, showcasing actually how valuable our skill set is and how helpful we can be to organisations. And when you showed me your framework for helping HR professionals figure out, okay, we want to embrace this opportunity, we want to really step up and show everyone that we can be helpful at this point, I just thought, this is fantastic, because it's all very well hearing the message of this is a great opportunity if you work in HR, but actually I can also see it could feel a bit daunting and a bit scary. And really, how can I be helping here? So again, for anyone listening or watching right now, if you're thinking, how do I go about embracing this opportunity? This episode of the podcast is here to help. And I hope you're going to be as thrilled to hear about Charlotte's framework as I was. So having given your framework a bit of hype there and shared my excitement about it, I suppose we should probably start diving into it now and ask you, how was it that you came up with your framework?
Yeah, good question, Fay. And I completely agree with everything that you've just said as well around this, just embrace the opportunity and be brave, I think. And so I came up with this framework actually about a year ago now. So before we started to talk a lot about AI, but it has come from a fundamental belief underneath it all, is that a business and its people can both be successful. And it's not about making a choice in that. And actually, my experience shows that where you invest in your people's success, your business will actually increase and improve its own success. Those two things work together. So the framework and the foundations that I talk about come through that practical experience and years of work, seeing what worked, what didn't, and also trying to distill that down into something really simple. I enjoy reading. I really enjoy seeing what other people are doing, what other people are thinking. But my instinct is always comes back to what's going to work and what can I do with something today. And I think as a profession, I've been working in HR for over 20 years. We can have a habit of making things a little bit complicated. We can, layer strategy on strategy. And I know that in some of my in-house roles, found that quite hard to navigate, to go, what should I actually be focusing on today? Because there are all these different things. The other part that really influenced it was that I think a frustration as well, that as a profession, we are often looked at to come in and fix or build culture, and that really simplistic view of what that looks like. And the reality being that culture isn't a project that HR can lead. It's the decisions that you make, the ways you work, the conversations that you have in your business. And what we can do as a profession is provide the operating system that guides and shapes the behaviour that influences your culture. So I wanted to build something that I could use with organisations, and came up with these 5 things that I think are always critical, always practical, and always something that you can implement. And then AI has, rapidly dominated our conversations over the last, 6 months. If you think about the conversations we were even having in January, it feels so different to where we are 6 months later. But helpfully, the framework has completely, stood up against that change. And if anything, feels even more critical right now. And I think the topics that I know we've been discussing in the HR profession for years now are things that are absolutely critical that we focus in on now. So, how do we think about skills over roles? How do we finally transform the appraisal process? And what do we do to support our managers? They kind of feel like they're non-negotiables for us to really face into now. Otherwise, I fear that, in a year's time, we might not like the future of work that we find ourselves in. So these are the things now that we have to focus on and consider, I think. What is it about AI adoption that is changing the focus or sharpening the focus on these 5 foundations? But they're all still critical.
I love the fact that you came up with this 5 foundations framework before the whole AI thing had exploded in the way that it has done, because I think that's really reassuring for anyone listening right now, but it's not something that's been quickly sort of cobbled together to try and help everyone with figuring out how they can be supporting their organizations effectively when it comes to AI. In fact, it really is this solid foundation that you can put in place to guide you as a chief people officer or HR director or head of HR or any of those things. It's going to be useful. So again, if you're listening or watching and you're thinking, oh, I don't know if I am going to be brave and put myself forward about the AI stuff, actually, what Charlotte's going to share is going to help you, full stop. It doesn't matter whether you decide to embrace the whole AI side of things or not. But again, having got us all excited about this, Charlotte, I'm going to have to ask you to share, what are these 5 foundations then? Do you want to tell us what they are?
Sure. So the five foundations are identity, clarity, enablement, recognition, and operations. And I know that we'll dive into each of these in a bit more detail, but at a high level, they work together really to form what I would describe as your people operating system. And identity defines what is important to you and your organization and becomes that anchor. Clarity helps make sure that every single person in your organization understands that and can see how that relates to them in their role. Enablement then helps us build the capability to get everybody where we need them to be. Recognition reinforces it when it happens. And importantly, operations makes the whole thing systematic and work seamlessly.
Okay, let's start diving into each of those in detail then. Can you take us through the first one, identity?
Yes. So as a HR profession, we are typically always in the room when we're talking about determining our company's values. And then we also do the work to make sure that these are woven into our people processes. So have we got questions for hiring? Do we, ask some questions in our appraisal processes about how people perform against the values? But I find that often this is very individual focused. And when we consider the hard decisions that our organizations have to make, and when we're making decisions that are not necessarily people related, the ones around what sales are we trying to achieve? Do our values always show up? And in my experience, they don't always. And what I find, that divergence between what you say and then what you do has a huge impact on trust and engagement. And as we are in this AI accelerated world, I think that gap can start to become visible even faster. And the other element of this from an AI perspective is it is accelerating individual productivity at just a staggering rate. But what comes along with that is the risk of us breaking team cohesion. And so that kind of balance between individual and team, we need to think about, how do we keep that balance? When your identity as an organization isn't solid, and perhaps it is the thing that just sits on the wall rather than actually being something that's discussed in your boardrooms, in your leadership team meetings, that team cohesion can fracture even faster because people don't really know the rules of what's important for the organization. How do they make sure that the decisions that they're making, often individually now, working with AI, are aligned with what you care about as an organization? And I think we have to start to consider what is really behind your organization's decisions. And the question I would encourage everybody to reflect on is, think about a really significant decision that your organization has made over the last, 3 months. And then, do you think everybody would be aligned on the values or kind of drivers behind what led to that decision? And if not, what really was the thing that drove that decision? And is that something different to what you tell people every day is important? And the other really important, I think, aspect is, as you're adopting AI, are you clear as a business what you're not prepared to compromise on as you go through that adoption process? And have you written that down, like how that is aligned to your values and ways of working? Because often at the moment, as I said before, the conversation's focused a lot on tooling. And again, that could miss a lot of what we care about as an organization and those ways of working for us.
So it sounds like then it's really important that as organizations, they're clear on what values it is that they're expressing openly to everyone and saying they want everyone to live by. And I'm guessing that behaviors are very much intertwined with that. So some people listening or watching will already have very clear values within their organizations. Some might not have any at all. And for others, it may just be that they're a bit tokenistic. So they're written down, but actually they're not really being lived. So I guess, first of all, there's that whole piece around making sure you have got that captured correctly and everyone's really on board with it and really clear about it. But then building on that, you're then telling us that actually, so now we also need to be thinking about this within the context of AI adoption within our organization. Just to drill down into that bit a bit more, are you able to share an example of what that might actually look like? I know you said actually write something down. So is there an example you could share maybe that you've done with a client when you've gone in to support them with this on what that might actually look like?
An obvious starting place might be your hiring process, for example. So there's a lot of conversation. A lot of, ATS providers are looking at how they build AI into their workflows. But what comes with that is obviously some understandable skepticism about what is that doing to our hiring process. And I think a really important starting point then is before you embark on thinking about how you build AI into your hiring process, what are the principles that matter to you? Where does, the human in the loop really matter, and being really clear on how you expect that to show up throughout your process. And then importantly, helping your candidates understand that too. So where do you expect your candidates to use AI, for example, and where would you expect them not to be using AI? Because it is there, it is accessible, and we need to help people understand how we expect that to be used within our own organisations, if they're within it or looking to join it. So I would start there. And I think with everything we do, AI or otherwise, when we're making the decisions about how we want that to look, how we want that to feel for people when they're going through that process, is it reflecting those values that you do have somewhere else? Because like you say, Faye, the risk is that those values sit somewhere else and they just become a bit performative perhaps, or they're there for small moments rather than shaping the decisions we make about how we want to work. So yes, I'd suggest hiring is a good place to start, because it's also a really important place to start, given that it is that shop window into your organisation.
Oh, I'm so pleased to ask you that question, because I thought you were going to say something completely different, Charlotte. In my mind, I thought you were going to say something like, yes, you have this overarching statement that says throughout the organisation, when it comes to AI adoption, we want everyone to do X, Y, Z. I hadn't expected you to laser down into a particular aspect, but I think that helps make it less daunting for people, and you can see how practical it is. So just really making sure that any decisions that you're making are being taken through that lens of values, I suppose. And I really like your points about communicating to people outside of the organisation as well. It's not actually just an internal thing.
And I think that the point you make there is important throughout all of this, because it's about how we operationalize everything that we care about as an organisation. And the tendency can be to sit and fine tune something that looks great and says something quite grand, but then there's something that disconnects between then how you actually operationalize it. And that's the most important bit to get right, because otherwise people's experience of everything feels completely disconnected. And that's where I think, that what we say, what we do feels like it gets further and further apart.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I could now just talk to you about this one topic, this very first foundation that we're that we're covering for the whole episode. I'm having to keep all of the questions inside that are leaping out at the moment so that I can make sure we do manage to cover the whole framework. So although I know lots of people might be thinking, oh, Faye, Charlotte, another question about this, I'm going to be really disciplined and move us along to the second foundation. So can you remind us, what was the second foundation? And talk us through it.
So the second foundation is clarity. And the sequencing of this is that identity focuses on what's important to you as an organisation, and clarity then makes that easily translatable to every single person within your organisation. And they're aligned and they have a clear and straightforward view on what good looks like for them in their role on a day-to-day basis and a week-to-week basis. I think this is a really interesting space in terms of where we are right now. And we have previously relied very heavily on job descriptions of varying lengths, which are written before someone even joins your organisation about what the role is going to be. And then, I don't know, they might get aired once a year in your appraisal or when you're looking for something, but are the opposite of dynamic. And then if you consider where we are right now and how fast things are shifting for people and what our expectations are, that job description feels like it's losing its relevance in how we operate. And we need to provide people with something more dynamic that reflects how things are changing. And, things aren't predictable. What's important to us in 1 month might not be important in the next month. So we've got to think about, as a profession, how do we set up people in our organisations for success rather than leading to that sense of confusion rather than clarity. And my last few years working in-house was in consultancy environments. And there's an interesting parallel because those sorts of environments have needed something more dynamic for a while, in that people will join, but they will do very different roles working for clients. And so we've had to solve for that problem for a few years now. And what has worked well in those environments, and what I think we need to now do across the board, is start with the skills and capabilities that we need to deliver our strategy, rather than the tasks that a person may do day to day. And then we can build that shared understanding, shared vocabulary about what's important to us across the organisation. And I've had great success in terms of building that sense of shared capabilities framework across functions. So the reality is there are technical skills that you might need depending on what you do, but those behaviours and attributes tend to be quite common in terms of what you need from people within your specific business. And importantly, what are those skills and attributes that you need aligned to the strategy that you're trying to deliver as an organisation? And so practically, I would suggest that everybody starts in that place. So looking at your strategy as a business, what do you need the humans in your team to be brilliant at to deliver that strategy? And what is AI going to handle in there? And you can start to pick out the different skills. And what we can see already is that critical thinking, judgment skills are ones that are becoming ever more important as we work with AI. So how do we question and critique what AI brings back to us? And I think a really interesting challenge for organizations is, how do you skill up people for judgment? Because what tended to happen is that it was time in post that built that judgment, and you did the work and then you learn how to question the work. But where AI is picking up that execution work now, how do we skill people up in judgment? It's going to need different approaches and different learning interventions. But the starting point is being really clear with everybody what we need to see. What does great look like, so that you can start to help people understand that. And then the other shift, I think, away from job descriptions is that we need to get better at describing what we need from people in terms of the problems that they're going to solve, rather than the tasks that they may undertake. Because again, we can probably do a better job at defining what that problem is we think we need to solve, that will be slightly steadier than tasks that could shift really regularly.
So as most people listening or watching will work within HR, that might be an easy function for me to ask you in the context of, because I absolutely hear what you're saying and I totally agree. And at the same time, it feels a bit scary, I suppose. And yeah. I don't have to do any of this stuff in my current role, where I don't actually work in HR anymore. So to help bring it to life a little bit, let's imagine that I am an HR director and I have an HR function. So I have people working within it, perhaps a small team. What would I actually be doing then? Instead of giving everyone job descriptions, what would it look like? Could you give us some examples of what some of these things might be for the people in my team?
Things that I've produced in previous roles have been a really simple framework that sets out the 5 or 6 attributes or skills that are required across every role in the organisation. We talked about critical thinking. That might be that. It might be something like leadership. It might be around commercial acumen. but relevant to where you're going as a business. What are those skills that you absolutely need across your entire team? And working with your leadership team to really distill that down as a starting point. And then what I've built in those frameworks in the past has been levels within that of what does that look like at an entry level? What does it look like as you progress through the organization? And defining that for people so that they can see, right, okay, this is the sort of experience that I need to be showing at my level, and then thinking about the sorts of work that you might do that demonstrates that. What that's likely going to lead to are functional descriptions of what does great look like within HR, as an example. Let's think about that. And that could be the sorts of technical skills that you would expect to see across your team. But then, importantly, what are the other things that they need to do day to day? How do they operate? So it's more around that how than the what, I suppose, because the what is so changeable. But what that needs, that kind of skills framework needs to have something coupled with it that gives you that this week, this month, these are the things I need to focus on. And I know through some of your previous shows, Faye, you focused on like the OKR framework.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing can work really well at going, right, okay, on a quarterly basis, what do we care about as a team? What are the rocks that we are trying to shift? And what are the indicators for us that we're doing that? Which then helps give you that guide of, well, if the work I'm doing today doesn't really affect any of those goals, should I be doing it and having that conversation? But that quarterly cadence feels much more sensible for where we are at the moment rather than that long job description.
Well, it's great to know that you are listening to other episodes, Charlotte. Thank you for bringing them up now. Because yes, if you're listening or watching right now and thinking, what are these OKRs of which Charlotte speaks? They stand for objectives and key results. And I think it's an incredibly helpful framework for us to be using within the HR profession. And I've got my phone here, which has got the list of all of my episodes on it, because I can never remember what any of the episode titles or numbers are anymore now that there are so many of them. So if, when you finished watching this one, you fancy hopping back to listen to some others that explain OKRs in more detail, the first time I talked about it was for episode 164. And the title of that is Becoming More Strategic as an HR Team, 3 Ways OKRs Can Help. And then I talked about them again with a guest, Dean Corbett. And that was for episode 166, which was the biggest HR strategy mistake and how to fix it. So, brief interruption of the main part of the episode, just to mention those ones as well. And I hope that if you do decide to listen to or watch those ones, that you really enjoy it. But coming back to you, Charlotte, it's really helpful. Thank you for talking that through in so much detail. I could already picture in my mind, right, okay, yes, I'm beginning to see how I could be mapping this all out if I was heading up an HR function. I can see how it would all be really helpful. But again, although I could ask you so many more questions about that, I better move us along to the third foundation. So can you remind us, what is your third foundation and what should we all be doing if we want to embrace this third foundation?
So the third one is enablement. And one of the very first HR directors that I worked for talked about times where initiatives that we launched perhaps could hit the mark but miss the point. And that phrase has always really stuck with me, where we put so much effort in, so much thought, but it ends up not having the impact that we might have hoped. And I can still recall some very painful moments in my career where I've got this wrong. Great intentions all the way through, but I had got lost in the HR perspective on something perhaps. And in my experience, the success of any initiatives that I have launched has always rested on how well we take the manager community on the journey. I think that managers are probably our most critical and most overlooked foundation, and they are core to how we enable the clarity and our identity across our teams. As a HR profession, our community of managers that we work with are our most powerful ally and lever in how we can shape and guide culture. But it is so often a community that doesn't necessarily get the attention it deserves. And I am going to refer to one of your other episodes, Faye, and it was one of your most recent ones, talking to Aoife about culture. And I was staggered about how many people move into manager positions and have had no support in developing that skill set. And even where organizations do provide some of that support to managers, they probably haven't updated what's provided in quite a while. And AI is really shifting the expectations for managers. It is creating this, I think, potential cognitive load crisis for all of us. And I think managers are facing that probably really acutely at the moment. They need to support their teams through uncertainty, change, help provide, clarity to them on what to focus on, what we've just, been talking about. But they also need to answer all the questions that their teams might have about what does this AI adoption mean for me, whilst also going through that as an individual too. And I think that this always starts with defining what does great people management look like within your organization. Because if you've worked in more than one workplace, you've probably seen more than one style of management, and different things work for different environments. And so we have to make sure that we don't fall into that trap of assuming that as soon as you become a manager, that people know exactly what that means. And I think as we define what management looks like, this is where the work that we've done under identity really flows through in helping shape what do we expect to see. And I would define that literally against our values that we have in place. And then also build a simple rhythm of management expectations that you expect to see, that makes sure that you provide space for your people. And I talked about management development, and I think we really need to quickly adapt our support for managers, deliver management training today that give them support on the topics that have probably been feeling quite noisy for them today. So we've talked about critical thinking. How do we skill up our managers to coach people for critical thinking? It's a whole new skill. So how do we provide them with that knowledge and capability? How do we help them feel confident to create psychologically safe environments for their team so that they can constructively challenge or question decisions that our organizations are making around AI? It can feel quite difficult, I think, at the moment to raise a question of concern and go against this tidal wave of enthusiasm. But we want people to be critically thinking. We need to provide those environments for them to do it. And then importantly, how to build great collaboration to make sure that the human to human work doesn't get lost along the way. So I really would encourage everybody listening to sit down and it just, spend a bit of time today thinking, does everybody know what great management looks like across this organization? And do we feel that it's aligned to our values and what we care about as a business?
Yeah. The episode that you mentioned where Aoife was talking about culture, and she shared a statistic that said just how many managers and leaders have received no training about being a manager or leader. That is episode 173 and is called How to Build a Better Workplace Culture So People Thrive at Work. And it's really shocking when you hear that statistic. I'm not going to repeat it now because I am awful at remembering numbers, so I'll probably get it completely wrong and make it even worse than it probably is. But it did leave me thinking, gosh, why is it still the case? Because from everything you've just shared, I think I certainly was nodding along, I think visibly in front of you and also on the inside, like, yes, it's just so obvious. Managers are such a critical piece of the puzzle. But despite us all knowing that is the case, what do you think's going on that means that so many organizations aren't actually proactively developing their managers? What's the mismatch here between everyone knowing we need to have good managers, but actually then not putting the support in place and the training and development in place for them?
It's a great question. And I think it's probably multifaceted. So I think there is time and I think a thread that runs through all of these foundations for me is how do we create the structures that free us up as a profession as well to focus in on work that really matters. So by building the right operating system, we can provide ourselves with more time, because we know that we are a really time poor profession. We're always really stretched, and I think that does always feature. I think it's also really easy to just assume that a great person that you have within your business moving into a manager role is going to be great. And we've probably all done it at one point or another and thought, oh, they'll be brilliant. And that person inwardly might be thinking, I really would quite like some guidance. So the wrong assumptions, I think, also drive it. And then also I've, across my career, perhaps at points worked myself and then also with teams where don't necessarily feel equipped to build those skills in our teams. And we know we struggle for investment to always bring somebody else in to support us with it. And so where it rests on us as a team, is it something that we're confident ourselves doing? And perhaps we, with like we've talked about, complexity of it, we make it into something really big that we need to deliver rather than, I think, how could we strip it way back? And I think if you did just a couple of things with your community of people managers, it would make a huge difference. One of those, work out what a great one-to-one looks like and then skill people up to be able to run a really great one-to-one. And then also, start to help people feel more confident about having difficult conversations. And these are the things that we do day in, day out. So we do know this. We're able to turn that into materials to support our people. And I think, people themselves don't have huge amounts of time. So if we can make those quite short, snappy workshops that we bring people in together, and then also record some of our training, have it on demand, create playbooks, do small things. And I think that's a really key message with all of this, in that it can feel massively overwhelming when you think, oh my goodness, I need to do all of this stuff. But picking off one thing that perhaps you do differently can make a big difference.
I think that's a very reassuring key message about not worrying about doing something that's absolutely perfect and ticks off every single box, but just starting small is still doing something. I know that in my HR career, I could definitely get sidetracked by thinking, oh, it's got to be perfect and really well thought out and researched. And then that means that I wouldn't necessarily get it done, or it would just take forever to get something off of the ground. So a great practical takeaway for us all. And yeah, I could easily morph this into a whole conversation about management, but I won't because we have still got 2 foundations to cover, I think. So I better move us along to the next foundation, the 4th one. Can you remind us, what was that foundation and what do you think we should be doing about it?
So next up is recognition. So we've defined what great looks like. We've got, managers in place who are able to support their teams to deliver that. Recognition is actually, how do we make sure that when we see that behavior, we reward people and recognize people for it. And so I talk a lot around our approaches to performance in this space. And most of our performance systems were built to measure output and execution. And AI is now handling a lot of that volume. So what do we recognize now in that changed world is a really important question. It's definitely time, in my opinion, to overhaul the approach to appraisals. Long been a champion of doing something a bit different. We know that it just takes up huge amounts of time across our businesses, and that effort to reward ratio feels way off. I do think as well, I mentioned before around the cognitive burden that AI can create for people. It's, really exciting. People can deliver things so much faster than we could before. But it's also exhausting simultaneously. That context switching that people are doing now, day to day, is enormous. And so if we keep our performance and feedback systems talking to people, once or twice a year, that's really going to miss those signals of trying to understand what's going on for people. And I mentioned before, I think one of the most important things you can do in a business is just work out a really great one-to-one cadence. And I think that's really important here in recognition as well. So what does that real-time approach to recognition look like? And how do we make sure that people can surface genuine issues within it? And then how do we recognize the behaviors and the great performance that we want to see in our organizations? And I think progression and what that looks like is also going to shift. And we need to, as a HR profession, think about, how do we maybe start to let go of the kind of leveled hierarchical career frameworks that we have sat with for our careers so far. And one of the conversations I've been having with people is around, actually, how do we recognize depth of skill progression within levels rather than it always being about how does progression mean level progression, because I think some of that is going to shift. And when we think about the judgment, those skills that we want to see from people, that really recognizes that depth again. There's a real cost, I think, of us continuing to do this in the way that we always have. We will risk rewarding the wrong things. We also know the pain of inconsistent recognition and reward within our profession when that happens across our businesses, and the time that takes for us to unpick when that happens. And also, I think the sustainability side of AI adoption is really important, and much better, more frequent approaches to this will help us support our teams as they deal with this really changing cognitive impact.
Listening to you talk about the recognition piece, I think it really helps drive home the fact that this framework, your 5 foundations framework, is one that is going to help everybody regardless of the AI piece. It's something that, you can see it in every single foundation that you're sharing, but I think it really came through for me vividly just then. And then last but not least, we're on to the final foundation. Can you remind us again, what was that final foundation and what do you think we should all be doing when it comes to this one?
So final one is operations. And this is the infrastructure that means everything else that you've spent the time building actually sticks. And I've seen so many examples where, amazing investment goes into building, people approaches, but then it's let down by inconsistency or unpredictability of the operation that actually runs everything. And there's an obvious gap here where AI can help us for efficiency. But I guess my call out here is to just make sure that we consider the human and experience lens to our people processes as we think about how AI for HR can support us. And the risk is that we automate away the human experience that we've worked so hard to build, and that trust that we have shaped and built within our organizations. It's not just about, can we make this faster, but does it still feel like it's delivering something valuable, then delivered by humans for humans. But importantly, when operations works well, that friction can disappear. But where it's not working well, that's where we see our teams ending up stuck in admin and then missing out on being on, going right back to the start of this episode around getting into the right rooms. Where our operations aren't working well, that's when we miss those moments because we're stuck doing the wrong work. And we have fragility that might be within those systems that depend on, this person needs to be around for this to actually happen because they remember to do it. And if they're not here, then it all starts to break down. So yeah, my ask to everybody today, I suppose, on this side is to just think about your most critical processes. And often they are things like our onboarding and offboarding processes. And mentally map one of those end to end and look for those moments where actually, if the one person who knows how to do that's not around, does it not happen? And they're the bits to focus in on first and think, right, okay, how can I make sure that this feels much more predictable, is automated when it's right to do so, but still considers the human that will experience that at the end.
Again, I love that you've given us that really practical tip of choosing one thing, because as you were talking, I was nodding along in person and on the inside, but also thinking, oh my gosh, this feels like it could be such a big thing. And it's not just something that affects the HR function either. It's like operations across the entire organization. So it's reassuring to have that very practical takeaway, that very practical tip of, okay, let's map out one thing and see where the blockers might be. Or, of course, perhaps switch back to the AI for HR part and think, okay, how can we be utilizing AI to optimize this? And sadly, that means that we're at the end of talking about your fabulous 5 foundations. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us all about them today. I am going to ask you for a book recommendation, but before I do that, first of all, I know that there'll be some people listening or watching thinking, how could I have Charlotte in my life? Please, can she come in and help us with this? I know how valuable it would be, because you do offer HR consultancy and fractional chief people officer services, don't you? So for anyone listening or watching who thinks this is great, but I wonder if I could actually get some hands-on support with Charlotte rather than just relying on the episode today, what is the best way of them finding out more about your work and getting in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks, Fay. I think start with the really important thing that we've hopefully seeded throughout here is you don't need to do all of this at once. And it's about prioritizing. So what I've done is I've tried to build some tools that help to do that. And I have ones that I use when I'm working with clients, but I've also created a free to access short 15 question diagnostic survey, which will help give you a view on where your foundational strength might be at the moment and where you might want to focus in on. So I'll make sure I send a link to you, Fay, which can go into the show notes of where people can access that tool. I then also can operate as a thought partner for people leaders. So my website is thepeoplethread.co.uk, where you can find a bit more about me there, or also on LinkedIn. Please drop me a message.
And for anyone listening or watching right now, as Charlotte said, I'll make sure I put links to everything in the show notes, or if you're watching the video version, they'll be in the description underneath the YouTube video as well. So that means I'm going to ask you, do you have a book recommendation or a resource that you could share with us all today?
I do. I have two, I'm afraid, and I have them both next to me. So for anybody watching, first up is HR Disrupted by Lucy Adams, which I read quite a few years ago now, but I still recommend it to anybody who has not read it yet. I think the framework in there is still as relevant, if not more, than it was when Lucy wrote it. And her framework is around treating employees as adults, human beings, and consumers. And all those things are so important. And it played such a massive role in my own approach to practicing HR that I think it's a really great read for everybody. And then the other one that I would recommend is by Jessica Swan, Built for People. I really enjoy reading everything that Jessica puts together. She's had some really interesting experience across HR roles and also COO roles, so brings a really interesting perspective. But this is all focused around taking a product lens to how we design employee experience, which again, I think is super relevant to everything that we've discussed today.
Thank you for sharing those great resources, along with sharing all of your wisdom with us today. It has been amazing having you join me and join everyone listening and watching on HR Coffee Time. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for being here.
Thank you, Fay. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I hope we'll get to catch up again very soon. I hope you enjoyed meeting Charlotte and learning about her 5 People Foundations framework. One of the biggest things that I'm taking away from the conversation with her is that bringing AI into an organization isn't just about choosing the right technology or helping people work more efficiently. It also affects jobs, skills, managers, culture, and the way that work gets done. And because of that, HR has such an important part to play in shaping all of it. I also really liked Charlotte's reminder that you don't have to try to tackle everything that she talked about at once. Just choosing one area to focus on and taking one practical step forward can still make a real difference. You'll find links to Charlotte's website, her free diagnostic tool, and the books that she recommended in the show notes or in the description on YouTube underneath this video if you're watching on YouTube. And if you enjoyed this episode and would like to listen to another one about AI that approaches it from a slightly different angle, then you might want to listen to episode 172. If you found today's episode helpful, I would be so grateful if you could share it with a friend or a colleague, or even maybe post about it on LinkedIn and recommend other people check it out, because these are some of the best ways of helping HR Coffee Time reach more people who might find it useful. That brings us to the end of today's episode. I will look forward to being back again in 2 weeks' time with the next one for you. Take care in the meantime.